Hey guys, thanks for joining us for another video. So today I'm going to be talking about two of our favorite bikes, the Surly Ogre and the Surly Bridge Club. So these are Surly's all-road touring bikes, and both of them have received recent updates. So we're going to be talking about what's changed, what's stayed the same for each bike, and at the end I'm going to talk about which of these two bikes you might choose if you're in the market and you're considering one of these two Surly bikes. So stay tuned for that. But before we get started, we want to hear from you. Are you a Ogre owner? Are you a Bridge Club owner? What do you think about these bikes? What do you think about the upgrades? We want to get the conversation started below, so please feel free to comment. Also, if you don't mind liking this video, if you got some good information out of it. And also, we'd love to have you as a subscriber so that you can stay up to date on what's going on at Ottawa Bike and Trail. So with that, let's get on with the video. All right, so here we have the current version of the Surly Bridge Club, and this version came out in November of 2023, and it replaces the majestic moss Surly Bridge Club that you've seen in our Building the Best Surly Bridge Club video series. If you haven't watched that series, check it out. We talk a lot about the Bridge Club and all the ways that we can customize it. And I will say one of the things that we love about Surly is that they don't change their bikes significantly year over year like some bike companies. Generally, if they do change something, it's a color change and maybe minor tweaks to componentry. But for this year, they did make, for Surly anyway, pretty significant changes to the Bridge Club. So there are really four major changes. First one, the color, the new whipped butter color. I think it looks great. That was the most obvious change, but there's three other changes that are maybe less obvious. And the first of those is the fork. So the fork on the Bridge Club has been completely redesigned. The old fork, which I'll show you, has a similar number of mounting points, but the mounting points are kind of staggered so that you have some side mounts and some that are angled towards the back of the bike. And theoretically, that gives you the ability to mount things in a little bit different configuration, and in some cases maybe mount a few more things to the front fork. But they've really standardized on this linear 4-bolt pattern here, which looks a lot cleaner and also I think is just about as functional. There's quite a few new accessories and racks and different mounts that you can put on your front fork, and most of them are sort of consolidating around this linear bolt pattern. So whether that's an improvement or not, I guess is up to you, but in my opinion, it's a little bit nicer design, looks cleaner, and you really don't lose a lot of functionality there. The other change to the front fork is the position of the rack mounts on the top of the fork, on the fork crown. They've moved those from a braze-on on the front of the fork and moved them to the shoulder of the fork. Functionality-wise, if you're using a Surly rack, it's not going to change, how that rack mounts. It's still going to mount just fine. But I do think it does make the fork look a little bit cleaner, and I think is a little bit more elegant design. So I'm a fan of the fork changes. I think the new fork looks a lot cleaner, and I think forks going forward, you'll see this new design. The third change is the drivetrain. So they've completely replaced the 1x11 drivetrain. The previous model was using Shimano Dior, still 1x11, but they've replaced it with Shimano Q's rear derailleur, and the front crankset is also a Shimano Q's crankset. On the old model, they were using Shimano Dior for the derailleur and a FSA comment for the crankset. So big change there. The gearing is similar. They did make one change. They went from a 30-tooth front chainring to a 32-tooth front chainring, and but the rear cassette is the same. It's a 11 to 50. So that does give you a little bit more high-end gearing with a little bit bigger front chainring, which I think is an improvement. And of course, the Shimano cues, very happy with that, the way it shifts. All in all, I think that was a good upgrade as well. If you're following us on our Bridge Club series, you know that we swapped the drivetrain out with a 2x drivetrain, which you could certainly do with this bike as well. The last change, I was actually very surprised to see. This is the first Surly bike that I'm aware of that has a kickstand mount. So they've got two mounting points on the rear chainstay to mount a kickstand, which we've done here. So no longer need a bike rack to hold the bike up. I think this is also a very good change. Doesn't come with the kickstand, so that's an extra purchase, but we've mounted a giant kickstand. Pretty much any rear mount kickstand will work, but love that. I think it's a good upgrade to the Surly Bridge Club. And yeah, so all in all, very happy with the new Surly Bridge Club. I think people are really gonna like it. We've sold a few already, and we've got a good number of these available going into spring. So looking forward to it. So with that, I'm gonna talk now about the Surly Ogre, give you a rundown on the Ogre, and then we'll talk about which bike you might choose if you're trying to decide between the Surly Bridge Club and the Surly Ogre. All right, so here we have the brand new Surly Ogre. This bike was just announced last week, and we just got a bunch of them in, and this was the first one we put together. I think it looks absolutely beautiful. There are not a huge number of changes from the previous model, but there are a few, and I'll tell you about them here. So the first thing is the color. Obviously, the previous version was a color called Champagne Supernova. It was kind of a goldish color, really beautiful bike. But I think they've outdone themselves with this bike. This is called Fermented Plum, and it's an absolutely gorgeous color. Really like the way it came out. So that's the most obvious change. They did make one other cosmetic change that is really cool. Instead of the normal Surly logo, they've put a special sticker pack on this one. This is actually a sticker pack that they've released before. It's called Overspray, and they haven't, as far as I know, used it on many bikes, but this one came with that, and I think the white block Surly logo looks fantastic against this color. So that's the cosmetic change. There is also on this bike a new fork. So similar to the Bridge Club, they've gone away from the mounts that are alternating on the fork leg, and instead they have the inline 4-bolt pattern like we saw on the Bridge Club. So similar change there. They've also made the change to move the rack mounts up to the shoulder of the fork. So same change there. And that's really the only changes that I could find on this bike. The drivetrain is still the Microshift Advent X, which is what they used in the last version of the Surly Ogre. It's using a SRAM NX crankset, and as far as I can tell, the gearing has stayed the same, the brakes are the same. All right, so now let's try to answer the question of who are these bikes for, and when would you buy a Surly Bridge Club versus a Surly Ogre? So let me start with that both of these bikes have very similar functionality, and I would call them all-terrain touring bikes, which is kind of a broad term. And I guess really that's one of the challenges with a bike like this, is that it can do so many things. It's hard to put it into a single category. You know, the interesting thing in the bike business is that we're kind of conditioned to think that a bike should have a singular purpose, like a gravel bike or a road bike or a touring bike. But in this case, and it's true of many of the Surly bikes, is that they do multiple things. And that's one of the things that we really love about Surly. So, you know, these bikes can be used for a commuter bike. They can be used for bike packing. They can be used for touring. They can be used for trail riding, as long as you're not doing any like heavy duty mountain biking. And they can do a lot of things. I use the term all-road touring bike because you can ride it on just about any surface. You can load it up however you want. It will handle all of that. So they are very similar though, in that they have very similar frame geometries. They are both flat bar bikes. They ride very similarly. There is one big difference, and that is the stack height on the Ogre is a little bit higher. So the bars are going to sit up a little bit higher. You're going to get a little bit more upright riding position. So one of the biggest differences is the wheel size. So the Bridge Club can accommodate two different wheel sizes. This one, as you see here, is a 27.5-inch wheel, which is traditionally a mountain bike size wheel. However, you can run a 700C wheel, which is a 29-inch wheel with a thinner tire. So if you get a bigger wheel size, you have to reduce the size of the tire. Whereas the Ogre was designed around a 29-inch wheel, so you can run the bigger wheel size, but you can also have a wider tire in the 29-inch wheel size. So it's got a little bit more tire clearance, both in the front and back. If you want to run a 29-inch wheel and you want a wider tire size, the Ogre is the better option for that. The Ogre also has a few more higher end features, such as a through axle on the rear, whereas the Bridge Club is quick release front and rear. The Ogre does have a quick release in the front, however, so just the rear through axle does make it a little bit easier to pull the rear wheel off and get it aligned properly when you're putting it back in. So that's an advancement on the Ogre. So as far as the drivetrain, interestingly, the Bridge Club has an 11-speed drivetrain, whereas the Ogre has a 10-speed drivetrain. So the Bridge Club using the 11-speed Shimano Qs. The range on that is 11 to 50 rear with a 32-tooth front chainring, whereas the Ogre is running a 10-speed with a 11 to 48 rear cassette and a 32-inch front chainring. So the range on the Bridge Club gearing range is a little bit wider, not much, a little bit wider than the Ogre. There's some benefit to that. I will say the Microshift Advent X drivetrain on the Ogre is a very substantial drivetrain, probably a little bit higher end drivetrain than the Qs, although they're both going to do the job perfectly and last for years. So not a major difference there. As I mentioned in the previous part of the video, the Bridge Club does have the kickstand mount, whereas the Ogre does not. However, the Ogre makes up for it in the rear dropout. So the Ogre has a very sophisticated rear dropout that allows you to do a lot of things. You can run a 1x drivetrain on this bike because you have a sliding rear dropout. You also on this dropout can run a roll-off hub, and you can also, it also has a built-in trailer mount. So the rear dropout got a lot of additional functionality that you might use if you're going to be doing a lot of heavy touring and you want a bike that is very versatile and can handle all of those different configurations. So as far as mounting points, I believe both bikes have the same number of mounting points. With the newly redesigned fork, we've got very similar mounting points there, although the Bridge Club does have an inside mounting point that the Ogre does not. Otherwise, the same number of bottle cage mounting points and rear rack mounting points, fender mounting points, all of those things seem to be very similar on both bikes. So you've got a lot of capabilities there. All right, so I did a little bit of a weight comparison on both bikes, and I was a little surprised that they both weigh in right around the same. Both are steel bikes and they're made to carry a load, so they are a little bit heavy. But the Bridge Club weighs in at 31 pounds, 10 ounces, and the Ogre weighs in at 31 pounds, 14 ounces. So about a 4-ounce difference. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is the price. So the Bridge Club comes in at $1,499 if you get the 27.5-inch model. If you get the 700C model, you save about $50, so $1,449. Whereas the Ogre is $1,699.99. So there's about a $200 difference between the two bikes. So that's something you want to consider. But for all of the additional features you get with the Ogre, I think that's really what justifies the additional cost. All right, so that's going to wrap up the video. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. If you are interested in a Surly Bridge Club, or any Surly for that matter, we are an Intergalactic Surly destination dealer, and that means that we have all of the available Surlys in stock for you to test ride, check out. So we'd love to have you come by and do a test ride, or if you live far away, you can check out our website and find all of the bikes there. We do ship, so if you do not have a local Surly dealer that you can go support, we'd love to help you out in getting you a Surly bike. So check out our website for more information on that. And that's going to wrap up the video. Thanks for watching.